throwaway account because a few people from my office are on Reddit and I'm not ready to deal with that mess yet. I never thought I'd be the kind of person writing a long post about office humiliation, but here we are. If you've ever been the joke hire, the person everyone smiles at while sharpening knives behind their backs, you'll probably recognize some of this. My boss smirked at me during my second week and said, in front of two managers, "Do you really think financial documents are any different from cleaning shit on the ranch you crawled out of? Here, people calculate, they don't wave their hands." I didn't answer. I just opened the budget spreadsheet and kept scrolling like I hadn't heard him. Yes, I really did come from a ranch. A real one. My family has worked there for generations. Animals, mud, winters that bite your fingers, mornings that start before the sun even thinks about rising. Cleaning stalls wasn't an insult where I grew up. It was part of the job. You didn't complain. You just did it properly so the animals didn't suffer. I never hid that part of my life. I wasn't ashamed of it. I still aren't. What I was ashamed of, quietly, was how badly I wanted more. I wanted a profession. I wanted clean hands at the end of the day and a tired brain instead of a broken back. Numbers made sense to me. Numbers didn't lie because they were emotional or insecure or drunk on a tiny bit of power. Math was logical, predictable, unlike people. When I showed up for the interview, they were desperate, like sweating desperate, end of quarter, missing documentation, pressure from tax authorities. They needed a body in a chair fast, someone who could at least keep spreadsheets from completely collapsing. The room was glass and steel and expensive coffee. Everyone looked like they belonged there. I didn't. Someone asked where I was from. I answered honestly. A ranch. The laughter was instant, loud, not even subtle. "Oh my God," one of them said, leaning back in her chair. "So you probably shovel feces all day?" I said yes, calmly, that it was part of the work. And no, I wasn't ashamed of it. That only made it worse. They laughed harder, like I'd delivered a punchline instead of a fact. I remember noticing the boss, the one who would later steal my work, watching me with that specific look people get when they've already decided who you are. Not curious, not impressed, amused. They hired me anyway. Not because they believed in me, because I was useful and funny to them. From day one, I wasn't a colleague, I was a mascot. A story they could tell. The ranch girl. They said it like it was a title I should be grateful for. Notes started appearing on my desk. Little sticky notes with one word written in block letters: poop. Someone once poured Nutella into my coffee mug and laughed like it was the cleverest thing in the world. "Relax," they said when I froze. "It's just a joke." My boss never stopped it. He smiled. Sometimes he joined in, asking loudly if I missed the smell of manure or if spreadsheets felt too clean for me. They wanted me gone, not fired, just uncomfortable enough to quit so they wouldn't have to explain anything to HR. The thing is, I was good. Very good. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I counted. Quietly. Every evening. Every column. Every line. I treated the budget the way I used to treat the ranch. Patiently, methodically, assuming that if something stank, it wasn't the animal. It was a problem someone ignored for too long. 3 evenings in, I noticed it. Not a mistake. A hole. Money disappearing neatly, line by line, dressed up so cleanly it looked intentional. Not enough to trigger alarms. Enough to vanish if you didn't really know how to look. That's when I realized something important. They thought I was stupid. And that assumption was going to cost someone dearly. By the second month, the jokes weren't even trying to be jokes anymore. At first, my boss, I'll call him M, had played the friendly skeptic. Smiles, claps on the shoulder that lingered a second too long, comments like, You're doing surprisingly well, for your background. That tone. You know the one. Like you're a dog that just figured out how to open a door. Then it shifted. It always does. He stopped explaining things to me in meetings. Not because I didn't need explanations, but because he wanted to demonstrate that I didn't deserve them. He'd talk around me, over me, through me. If I asked a question, he'd sigh dramatically and say, "We've already covered this," even when we absolutely hadn't. Suddenly, tasks I had done flawlessly before were being reassigned for efficiency. Reports I prepared were returned with vague comments like tone unclear or numbers feel off. No specifics, no corrections, just enough doubt planted to make me question myself. The jokes escalated too. One morning, I walked in to find a printed cartoon taped to my monitor, a stick figure shoveling manure into a spreadsheet. Caption: Career Growth. People nearby snickered without even looking at me. They didn't need to. The point wasn't my reaction. It was my silence. I took it down, threw it away, sat down, opened my files. That was my mistake. Because silence, to people like that, doesn't mean dignity. It means permission. M started correcting me publicly. He'd interrupt me mid-sentence in meetings to restate exactly what I'd just said, then look around the table for approval. When someone nodded, he'd smile like a proud parent. If I tried to continue, he'd raise a finger and say, "Let me finish." Once, I stayed late to reconcile a discrepancy in a supplier ledger. It took hours. When I finally fixed it, I sent him a detailed breakdown with attachments, references, and a clean summary. The next morning, he presented my solution as his own, word for word. I was sitting right there. He didn't even look at me when he said, "I stayed up late thinking about this, and here's what I came up with." People complimented his dedication, his sharp eye. Someone joked that he must have farm blood too, since he liked getting his hands dirty. I felt something cold spread through my chest. Not anger yet. Not sadness. Something worse. Clarity. From that day on, his behavior changed completely. He stopped pretending I was invisible and started treating me like a threat that needed to be managed. My access permissions were quietly reduced. Files I'd worked on for weeks suddenly required approval I couldn't grant myself. Emails I was supposed to be CC'd on slipped through the cracks. When mistakes happened because I didn't have full information, M would tilt his head and say, "See? This is why background matters." The humiliation became strategic. He assigned me tasks designed to fail. Incomplete data, impossible deadlines, conflicting instructions given verbally so there was no record. When I asked for clarification in writing, he replied, "Use your judgment. I thought ranch life taught independence." Once, during a team lunch, he loudly asked if I needed help using cutlery, now that I was eating among civilized people. Everyone laughed. Someone filmed it. I saw the phone. I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door. I didn't cry. I stared at myself in the mirror and felt small. Smaller than I'd felt shoveling stalls at 5 in the morning in freezing rain. At least animals didn't enjoy your humiliation. That night, I went home shaking. My hands wouldn't stop trembling as I opened my laptop. Not because I was scared, because I was furious. I went back to the budget. Not just the surface numbers this time, the underlying flows, vendor patterns, timing inconsistencies, repeating decimal behaviors that didn't belong where they were. That's when I saw it clearly. The whole wasn't random. It followed M projects he supervised, accounts he approved, adjustments he personally simplified. Money didn't just disappear. It was redirected, disguised as rounding, deferred costs, temporary allocations. It was elegant, and it was theft. I realized then why he hated me. It wasn't because I came from a ranch. It was because I knew how to clean shit properly. And I had just found his. I didn't confront him right away. That's probably the part people don't like when I tell this story. They want the dramatic moment, the brave speech, the public takedown, the instant justice. That's not how it happened. Not at first. For 2 weeks after I confirmed what I'd found, I acted exactly the same. Same silence. Same lowered eyes in meetings. Same neutral, okay, when M dumped another half-broken task on my desk. I let him think the humiliation was working. I let him think I was tired, confused, maybe even grateful he hadn't fired me yet. Inside, though, everything had shifted. I started documenting everything. Dates, times, versions of files, access logs, who approved what and when. I learned very quickly that people like M lie the most when they think no one is paying attention. His lies weren't wild, they were subtle. Little rewrites of reality. I never said that. You misunderstood. That wasn't your task. I told you already. So I stopped relying on memory. I relied on proof. The confrontation happened by accident, or maybe that's just how it felt. It was a Monday morning meeting, one of those pointless ones where everyone pretends to be busy while M performs leadership. He was late, as usual, and came in already irritated. Slapped his laptop down, sighed loudly, glanced at me. "Before we start," he said, "I want to address an ongoing issue." That was my cue. My stomach tightened. I knew, somehow, this was about me. He put my latest report on the screen, the one I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. finishing, the one where I'd quietly corrected 3 of his errors without saying a word. "This," he said, pointing at the numbers, "is why we don't rush people into roles they're not prepared for." A few people shifted in their seats. No one spoke. "These figures are optimistic," he continued, "which tells me someone doesn't fully understand corporate accounting standards." He looked directly at me now, smiling, enjoying it. "In ranch work?" he added casually. "Close enough might be fine. Here, it's dangerous." I waited until he finished. I didn't interrupt. That alone seemed to irritate him. Then I spoke. "They're not optimistic," I said. Calm, even voice. "They're conservative. I adjusted for the deferred costs you approved on Project Delta." Silence. He blinked. Just once. "I don't recall approving that," he said lightly. "And I certainly didn't ask you to make independent adjustments." "You did," I replied. "Thursday, 4:17 p.m. It's in the approval log." His smile tightened. "You see?" he said to the room. "This is what I mean. She's confused." Confused. That word landed harder than any joke about manure ever had. I felt heat rise up my neck, but I kept my hand still on the table. "I'm not confused," I said. "I'm precise." A couple of people looked up then. Precision mattered to them. M leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms. The performance shifted. "Listen," he said, voice dropping into something almost kind. "I admire your effort, really. But ambition without understanding can be embarrassing, and I'd hate for you to embarrass yourself further." There it was. The downplay. The warning disguised as concern. "You should focus on the tasks appropriate to your level," he continued. "Data entry, support. Let the senior staff handle strategy." I nodded. Not because I agreed, because I finally understood him completely. "Okay," I said. That single word seemed to confuse him more than any argument would have. The meeting moved on. People talked about deadlines and KPIs and things that suddenly felt very far away from me. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. Afterward, as everyone packed up, M stopped me near the door. "Don't take this personally," he said quietly. "You're useful. Just stay in your lane." I looked at him then. Really looked. Up close, he didn't seem powerful. He seemed scared. His eyes kept flicking away like he was already calculating damage. I am in my lane, I said. He laughed, short, sharp. Sure you are, he replied. Just remember where you came from. That was the moment something in me finally broke and settled. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten him. I didn't reveal what I knew. I went back to my desk and opened my files, because confrontations don't always end with shouting. Sometimes they end with someone deciding to stop surviving and start finishing the job. I thought finding proof would make me feel powerful. That's what movies teach you, right? You uncover the truth, and suddenly the fear disappears. You stand taller, you breathe easier, you win inside, even before anyone else knows. That's not what happened. What happened was quieter and uglier. After that meeting, after the word confused was said out loud in front of people whose respect I needed, something inside me started to fracture. Not all at once, in small, sharp pieces. At first, it was anger. The kind that makes your jaw ache from clenching, the kind that wakes you up at 3 a.m., replaying conversations you didn't defend yourself in. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing his voice in my head. Stay in your lane, where you came from, useful. Every sentence felt like a thumb pressing down on a bruise. I stopped eating properly. I lived on coffee and whatever I could swallow without thinking. My hands shook sometimes when I typed, and I had to slow my breathing before meetings so no one would notice. Then came the paranoia. Every laugh behind me sounded like it was about me. Every Slack message felt loaded. When someone said my name, my stomach dropped. I started double-checking everything: emails, formulas, attachments. Not because I doubted my work, but because I couldn't afford even one tiny mistake. Not now. Not with him watching. I felt like I was on trial without knowing the charges. What hurt the most, though, was the isolation. People who had once chatted with me casually stopped doing it. Not out of cruelty, out of fear. M had influence. Aligning with me meant risking becoming the next joke, the next target. So they smiled politely, kept conversations short, avoided sitting next to me in meetings. I didn't blame them, but it still hurt. There was one afternoon when I overheard two co-workers talking in the break room. They didn't know I was there. One of them said, "Honestly, I think she brings it on herself. If she just tried harder to fit in." Fit in. I went to the bathroom after that and finally cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just tears slipping down my face while I pressed paper towels under my eyes, angry at myself for giving him that much space in my head. For a moment, a real, terrifying moment, I considered quitting. I imagined walking out, packing my things, going back to something familiar, something honest, work where effort was visible and respect wasn't political. I imagined telling my family I'd tried and failed, and that maybe wanting more had been a mistake. That thought broke my heart more than anything M had said, because I knew it wasn't true. Then the sadness set in. Not the explosive kind, the heavy one, the kind that makes everything feel slow and dull. I did my job mechanically. I spoke less. I laughed at nothing. I felt like I was shrinking to fit the space he'd decided I deserved. But underneath all of that, the anger, the fear, the sadness, something else was growing. Acceptance. Not acceptance of what he was doing. Acceptance of who he was. M wasn't cruel because I was weak. He was cruel because he needed someone beneath him to feel tall. He lied because the truth didn't benefit him. He stole because he didn't trust his own competence. And I realized something else too. This wasn't about the ranch. The ranch was just a story he could use, a convenient costume to dress his contempt in. If it hadn't been that, it would have been my accent, my clothes, my silence, my gender, something. People like him always find a reason. That understanding didn't make the pain disappear, but it changed its shape. I stopped asking myself why me, and started asking what now. For the first time since I joined that company, I stopped reacting. I started choosing. The decision didn't come to me in a dramatic flash. There was no montage, no moment where I looked out a window and suddenly knew who I was meant to become. It came on a Wednesday evening, quietly, while I was sitting alone in the office long after everyone else had gone home. The lights were dimmed automatically at 8 p.m., leaving my corner half-shadowed. The building made those hollow sounds it only makes at night. Distant elevators, the hum of servers, the quiet breathing of a place that pretends it's empty but never really is. I stared at my screen and realized something terrifying. I could keep doing this forever. I could keep proving myself, keep collecting evidence, keep being technically right while emotionally hollowed out. I could wait for the perfect moment to expose M, wait for someone higher up to finally notice, wait for justice to arrive like it owed me something. And in the meantime, this place would keep taking pieces of me. That's when it hit me. Winning didn't automatically mean staying. Up until that point, my entire focus had been survival. Endure the humiliation. Don't react. Outwork the narrative. Stay long enough to justify your presence. Stay long enough to prove you belong. But belong to what? A company where competence was a threat and cruelty was rewarded? A team that laughed when someone was dehumanized and went quiet when it became inconvenient to speak? I minimized the spreadsheets and leaned back in my chair. For the first time, I let myself ask a question I'd been avoiding since day one. What do I want now? The answer scared me. I wanted out. Not in a dramatic, bridge-burning way. Not with speeches or lawsuits or slammed doors. I wanted to leave intact. With my skills sharp, my confidence repaired, my dignity untouched. I didn't want my entire story to be about him. So I made a plan. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't forgiveness. It was strategy. First, I stopped giving more than my job required. No unpaid overtime. No quiet fixes for other people's mistakes. No emotional labor smoothing over tension I hadn't created. I did my work cleanly, correctly, and documented everything. For me, not for him. Second, I updated my resume. That part hurt more than I expected. Writing down my accomplishments felt strange after months of being told, subtly and not so subtly, that I was replaceable. I had to force myself to use facts instead of feelings, numbers instead of narratives. And when I did, I saw something clearly for the first time in a while. I was valuable. Third, I started applying elsewhere. Quietly. Carefully. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't hint. This was mine. Interviews felt surreal at first. People asked me thoughtful questions. They listened. They didn't flinch when I talked about my background. Some even smiled, impressed by the discipline and resilience it implied. One recruiter said, "That kind of work ethic can't be taught." I almost cried on the train home. At the office, M sensed the shift. He started hovering again, asking pointed questions, making comments like, "You've been quieter than usual," and "Don't get complacent." Once, he joked loudly that I should be grateful I still had a desk. I smiled, took notes, logged everything. But inside, I was already leaving. The humiliation stopped owning me the moment I stopped needing his approval. I didn't expose him yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I realized something important. Justice doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like refusal. Refusal to let someone define the rest of your life. One evening, as I shut down my computer and packed my bag, I caught my reflection in the dark screen. I looked tired, but I also looked steady. For the first time since I walked into that glass office and heard laughter behind me, I wasn't trying to prove that I belonged there. I was choosing where I belonged next. I handed in my notice on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic one. No audience. No trembling hands. Just a printed letter. 2 pages. Neutral language. Gratitude for the opportunity. Commitment to a smooth transition. Last working day clearly stated. M read it twice. I watched his face while he did. First confusion, then irritation, then something close to panic, quickly masked by a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So," he said lightly, tapping the paper. "Running back to the ranch?" I didn't react. "No," I replied. "I'm moving forward." That was it. No speech, no justification. He laughed, but it sounded thin. "You know, not everyone is cut out for corporate environments." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm leaving one that isn't." For the next 2 weeks, everything shifted again. People started talking to me more, quietly at first, asking where I was going, telling me in low voices that they were sorry, that they'd seen how I was treated, that they hadn't known what to do. One person admitted they'd kept copies of my work because it was the cleanest in the department. Another said they'd suspected something was off with the numbers but hadn't dared look too closely. M, on the other hand, became colder. He stopped joking, stopped engaging. He delegated my handover to someone else and avoided being alone with me. Once, I caught him staring at my screen when he thought I wasn't looking, as if afraid I might still be counting something. I was. Just not for him anymore. On my last day, there was no farewell lunch, no card. Just a few awkward smiles and one sincere hug from a coworker who whispered, "You deserved better." Walking out of that building felt strange. I expected relief, or triumph, or rage. What I felt instead was space, room to breathe, room to think, room to be myself without bracing for impact. A month later, I started my new job. Different company, smaller team. No glass walls, no performative leadership. The first week, my manager asked for my opinion in a meeting, and then actually waited for my answer. When I explained my reasoning, no one interrupted. No one smirked. I went home that day exhausted and cried on my kitchen floor. Not because I was hurt, because I finally wasn't. Looking back now, here's what I learned, and what I wish someone had told me earlier. Humiliation at work is rarely about your competence. It's about someone else protecting their ego. Silence doesn't always mean strength, but neither does fighting every battle. Choosing when and where to stand matters. Your background is not a weakness unless you let someone convince you it is. Everything that taught you discipline, patience, and resilience will outlast their jokes. And most importantly, you don't owe loyalty to a place that feeds on your self-doubt. If you're reading this and you're the one being laughed at, sidelined, talked down to, especially if you're quiet, different, or underestimated, please hear this. You are not imagining it. You are not too sensitive. And you are not required to destroy yourself to prove your worth. Sometimes the strongest response isn't revenge. It's leaving with your skills intact, your head high, and your future untouched by their cruelty. I didn't come from nothing. I came from work. And that, it turns out, was more than enough. I thought leaving would mean the story was over. That once I walked out with my box and my neutral smile, that chapter of my life would quietly close and stay closed. That was naive. What no one really tells you about toxic workplaces is that they don't end when you leave. They echo. They linger. They follow you home in strange, delayed ways. About 3 weeks into my new job, I got an email from an unknown address. No subject line, just one sentence in the body. "Did you hear what happened upstairs?" My stomach dropped immediately. Old reflex. I didn't reply. An hour later, another email came in, this time longer. Apparently, an external audit had been triggered. Not by me, and that's important, but by a routine compliance review that suddenly went very, very deep. deeper than it had any right to. Someone up the chain had finally noticed inconsistencies, the kind that don't scream, but whisper, until the wrong person listens. M's name came up. A lot. Projects delayed, payments frozen, meetings behind closed doors. My former coworker wrote that people were suddenly remembering things. Old emails, strange approvals, reports that looked familiar, too familiar. My reports. Copied, repurposed, reused. Without me there to quietly clean things up, the system started to choke on its own mess. I sat at my kitchen table reading the email, hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no joy, no vindictive thrill, just a strange, distant calm. A few days later, another message arrived. M was reassigned. Basement level reassigned. Archives, paperwork, no direct reports, no authority, no spotlight. The kind of position designed to make someone invisible without technically firing them. I laughed then, just once, short and surprised. Not because he suffered, but because I recognized the irony. Dirty work, after all. More messages followed over the next weeks. Little fragments of information passed quietly, almost guiltily. People asking if I'd known, if I'd seen it coming, if I'd reported something. I replied honestly every time, no, I just did my job. And that was the truth. The strangest part came later. One evening, my phone rang, a number I hadn't saved but somehow recognized. I answered. It was M. His voice sounded smaller, tighter, like someone speaking through clenched teeth. I hear you've been telling people things, he said. I almost laughed again. I haven't been telling anyone anything, I replied calmly. I don't work there anymore. Silence. Then sharper. You think you're better than us now? There it was. The core of it. Always had been. No, I said. I think I'm better off. He exhaled hard, like he wanted to say more but couldn't find a version of reality where he still won. You know, he muttered, people like you don't usually last. I lasted long enough, I said. And I left. I hung up before he could respond. After that, the calls stopped. I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like someone who had walked out of a burning building and was only now realizing how much smoke they'd been breathing. At my new job, no one knew this story unless I chose to tell it. I wasn't the ranch girl. I wasn't the joke. I wasn't the problem hire. I was just competent. And it turns out, that was all I ever needed to be. The humiliation didn't define me, but it did teach me something brutal and useful. Some places don't deserve your best self, and some people only understand loss when it's quiet and permanent. Leaving didn't erase what happened, but it made sure it didn't get to happen again. I didn't expect my body to react after everything was supposedly over. Mentally, I was fine. Better than fine. New job, new routine, people who treated me like a professional instead of a punchline. On paper, it looked like a clean escape. But my body didn't get the memo. The first sign was sleep. Or the lack of it. I'd fall asleep exhausted and wake up at 4:30 a.m. every single night, heart racing, convinced I was late for something. Sometimes I dreamed I was back in that glass office, staring at a spreadsheet that kept changing numbers every time I blinked. Sometimes it was M's voice, calm and dismissive, telling me I was confused. I'd wake up angry at myself for still caring. At work, I flinched when my manager said my name unexpectedly. Not visibly. I got good at hiding it. But inside, my chest would tighten like it was bracing for impact. When someone praised my work, my first instinct was suspicion. What do they want? What's the catch? There wasn't one. That was the problem. I realized something unsettling. I had learned to function under humiliation so well that normal respect felt unfamiliar, unsafe even. Like standing on solid ground after years of balancing on something sharp and narrow. Your muscles don't trust it yet. One afternoon, my manager asked me to walk her through a model I'd built. As I explained my assumptions, she nodded, asked clarifying questions, and then said, "This is excellent. You clearly thought this through." I felt my throat tighten. I excused myself afterward and sat in a bathroom stall, staring at the floor, trying not to cry over something so stupid as being treated decently. That's when it really hit me. What happened to me wasn't just a bad boss, it was conditioning. In my old job, I'd learned to stay small, to anticipate attacks, to minimize myself before someone else could do it for me. I'd learned that silence was safer than speaking, and perfection was the only acceptable shield. Those lessons didn't disappear just because I changed buildings. I started noticing other things too. How I apologized constantly. For asking questions, for taking time, for existing in shared space. How I overprepared for meetings, terrified of being caught off guard. How I replayed conversations long after they ended, searching for mistakes no one else noticed. It was exhausting. So I did something I'd never done before. I talked about it. Not at work. Not yet. But with a therapist, sitting on a couch that didn't smell like disinfectant, trying to explain why a spreadsheet could make my hands shake. Saying the words out loud felt ridiculous at first. My boss was mean to me, but when I described the patterns, the public humiliation, the gaslighting, the theft, the constant undermining, her expression changed. That was workplace abuse, she said calmly. Abuse. I'd never used that word. It felt too heavy, too dramatic, like I was stealing language meant for something worse. But once she said it, things rearranged themselves in my head. Abuse doesn't have to leave bruises. It just has to teach you that you don't deserve safety. Understanding that didn't fix everything overnight, but it gave me permission to stop blaming myself for reactions I didn't choose. I wasn't weak for still feeling it. I was healing. Slowly, deliberately, I started unlearning. I stopped apologizing for neutral things. I let silences exist in meetings without rushing to fill them. When praise came, I practiced saying, "Thank you," instead of deflecting it like it was dangerous. Some days were easier than others. Some days I still heard laughter that wasn't there. But the difference now was this. I didn't confuse that voice with truth anymore. It was just an echo. And echoes fade when you stop feeding them. I didn't expect my body to react after everything was supposedly over. Mentally, I was fine. Better than fine. New job, new routine, people who treated me like a professional instead of a punchline. On paper, it looked like a clean escape. But my body didn't get the memo. The first sign was sleep. Or the lack of it. I'd fall asleep exhausted and wake up at 4:30 a.m. every single night, heart racing, convinced I was late for something. Sometimes I dreamed I was back in that glass office, staring at a spreadsheet that kept changing numbers every time I blinked. Sometimes it was M's voice, calm and dismissive, telling me I was confused. I'd wake up angry at myself for still caring. At work, I flinched when my manager said my name unexpectedly. Not visibly, I got good at hiding it. But inside, my chest would tighten like it was bracing for impact. When someone praised my work, my first instinct was suspicion. What do they want? What's the catch? There wasn't one. That was the problem. I realized something unsettling. I had learned to function under humiliation so well that normal respect felt unfamiliar. Unsafe even. Like standing on solid ground after years of balancing on something sharp and narrow. Your muscles don't trust it yet. One afternoon, my manager asked me to walk her through a model I'd built. As I explained my assumptions, she nodded, asked clarifying questions, and then said, "This is excellent. You clearly thought this through." I felt my throat tighten. I excused myself afterward and sat in a bathroom stall, staring at the floor, trying not to cry over something so stupid as being treated decently. That's when it really hit me. What happened to me wasn't just a bad boss, it was conditioning. In my old job, I'd learned to stay small, to anticipate attacks, to minimize myself before someone else could do it for me. I'd learned that silence was safer than speaking and perfection was the only acceptable shield. Those lessons didn't disappear just because I changed buildings. I started noticing other things too, how I apologized constantly, for asking questions, for taking time, for existing in shared space. How I overprepared for meetings, terrified of being caught off guard. How I replayed conversations long after they ended, searching for mistakes no one else noticed. It was exhausting. So I did something I'd never done before. I talked about it. Not at work. Not yet. But with a therapist, sitting on a couch that didn't smell like disinfectant, trying to explain why a spreadsheet could make my hands shake. Saying the words out loud felt ridiculous at first. My boss was mean to me, but when I described the patterns, the public humiliation, the gaslighting, the theft, the constant undermining, her expression changed. That was workplace abuse, she said calmly. Abuse. I'd never used that word. It felt too heavy, too dramatic, like I was stealing language meant for something worse. But once she said it, things rearranged themselves in my head. Abuse doesn't have to leave bruises. It just has to teach you that you don't deserve safety. Understanding that didn't fix everything overnight, but it gave me permission to stop blaming myself for reactions I didn't choose. I wasn't weak for still feeling it. I was healing. Slowly, deliberately, I started unlearning. I stopped apologizing for neutral things. I let silences exist in meetings without rushing to fill them. When praise came, I practiced saying thank you instead of deflecting it like it was dangerous. Some days were easier than others. Some days I still heard laughter that wasn't there, but the difference now was this. I didn't confuse that voice with truth anymore. It was just an echo. And echoes fade when you stop feeding them. I thought the hardest part was behind me, that once I understood the pattern, named it, and rebuilt myself somewhere safer, the universe would finally give me a break. That was wishful thinking. About 6 months into my new job, something small happened. So small most people wouldn't even clock it. We were in a cross-team meeting. A new stakeholder joined late, skimmed the agenda, and said, "So who built this model?" Before I could answer, a colleague, not maliciously, just reflexively, started explaining it as if it were his. Not stealing, not lying, just absorbing. Old me would have gone quiet instantly, let it pass, told myself it didn't matter, that it wasn't worth the tension, that I'd rather be liked than accurate. I felt that instinct rise in my chest like muscle memory. That was the real test. I heard M's voice in my head for half a second. Stay in your lane. Then I did something that surprised even me. I built it, I said calmly. Not loud, not sharp, just factual. Happy to walk through the assumptions. The room went quiet for a beat. The colleague blinked, nodded, and stepped back without argument. No drama, no backlash, no smirk. The meeting moved on. That was it. But inside me, something clicked into place. Nothing bad happened. No one laughed. No one punished me. No one reframed me as difficult or arrogant or out of my depth. I wasn't humiliated for taking up space. I went back to my desk afterward and just sat there for a minute, hands resting on the keyboard, breathing. That's when I realized how deeply the old fear had lived in me, not just fear of conflict, but fear of visibility. Fear that being seen would automatically mean being targeted. That fear wasn't mine originally. It had been taught. And just like anything taught, it could be unlearned. Over the next weeks, similar moments kept appearing, little forks in the road, chances to either shrink or stand. Each time, I chose differently, not aggressively, not defensively, just honestly. And the more I did, the quieter the old voices became. One evening, while cleaning out old files on my laptop, I stumbled across a folder from my first job. Screenshots, drafts, notes. Proof I'd once collected obsessively, terrified I'd need to defend myself someday. I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not because it wasn't real, not because it didn't matter, but because I no longer needed to carry it with me like armor. The past had already taught me what it needed to teach. I closed my laptop and realized something else, something simple and grounding. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. I wasn't bracing. I was present. And that, after everything, felt like freedom. I didn't plan to write this last part. Honestly, I thought the story ended when the fear quieted down and my life started feeling like my own again. But I kept thinking about the version of me who first walked into that glass office, who laughed politely when people laughed at her, who thought competence would protect her from cruelty. So this is for her. And maybe for you, if you're somewhere similar right now. Here's the thing I understand now, with distance and a steadier heartbeat. Humiliation works best when it's slow. No single moment feels big enough to leave over. No single comment sounds bad enough to report. It accumulates. It teaches you to doubt your reactions. It trains you to self-edit before anyone else has to. And the most dangerous lie of all is this one. If you're really good, it won't happen to you. That's not true. It often happens because you're good. Because your presence threatens someone who needs hierarchy more than results. For a long time, I thought my strength was endurance. That surviving meant staying. That dignity was something you preserved by swallowing discomfort and calling it professionalism. Now I know better. Strength is recognizing when the cost is too high. Dignity is choosing yourself without needing permission. If I could go back and give advice to anyone standing where I stood, it would be this. Pay attention to patterns, not apologies. Respect doesn't need to be earned daily. If your body is reacting before your mind catches up, listen to it. And please, please, don't confuse suffering with growth. Real growth expands you. It doesn't make you smaller. I still think about the ranch sometimes, about how work there was hard but honest. You knew what needed cleaning, and you cleaned it. No pretending, no games. In the end, that's what saved me. Not where I came from, but what it taught me. To see messes clearly, to do the work thoroughly, and to walk away when something was rotten instead of letting it poison me. If you're being humiliated at work and you're wondering whether you're overreacting, let me say this plainly. You're not weak. You're not imagining it. And you're not required to stay and prove anything. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight, it's to leave and build a life where no one gets to treat you that way again. That's what I did. And I'm finally at peace with it.